The ending of this book was Dookie sucked straight out the hole. It was awful. When I'm reading a thriller, I need the thriller to thrill me, right? I feel like that's self-explanatory. Now, for this video, I'm going to be taking a page out of Frankie's shelf, and I'm going to be reviewing this and breaking this down as I read it. So I'm currently only at the 30% mark of Beautiful Ugly by Alice Feeney, and I wanted to just share my thoughts. So if you haven't read this book, all you really need to know is it is about a man named Grady whose wife goes missing as he is on the phone with her. She's on her way driving back home to celebrate the fact that he just made the New York Times bestseller list. He is an author, obviously. And she goes missing, just gets, as far as we know, yanked out of the car and just disappears. And then the story proceeds to follow Grady a year later after his wife's disappearance. His agent, Kitty, gives him access to a very secluded cabin on an island called Amberley in Scotland. And as far as I've gone in the story, he has just made it to Amberley and he's getting to know the locals and everything like that. Now, something that I think is interesting about this book so far is that up until this point, most of it is told from Grady's perspective, but we do get one singular chapter of Abby, his wife's perspective, and this is before she has gone missing. Chapter 1 was a bit of a rough start. I felt like the writing was a bit disjointed. It felt like Grady's thoughts were bouncing from train of thought to train of thought. He's talking about how he became a writer. He's talking about his wife's job. Then he's talking about how important the tradition of eating fish and chips are in their relationship. And there's no flow to it. There was no like transition where I felt like, okay, we're going from this thought to it. It felt very much like how my brain works, where I'm thinking about something and then I'm thinking about something else and then I'm thinking about something else. And I just kind of jump from thought to thought. I don't know if that was on purpose as a testament to Grady's characterization or if this is just a writing style. I've never read anything else by Alice Feeney, so I'm not sure if this is just kind of how she writes. I was able to get past it pretty early on, but it was something that I did note where I was just like, I'm not liking that. Now, something that I did actually enjoy about this book is the fact that the tension is being set up pretty well. Obviously, in a thriller, you want your audience to care about what is happening, to care about these characters, to care about why she went missing, and to want to learn what happened. And I think that Alice Feeney does a pretty good job of that. I am invested. I do want to know what's going on. So starting off, I kind of clocked Grady as a bit of an unreliable narrator because very early on, he is talking about his and his wife's relationship and about how she was his person. And he's talking about, what an introvert he is and how he just truly does not like socializing. He doesn't like maintaining friendships and relationships outside of his imaginary characters in the book. And because he kind of unprompted was discussing how he loves living in his own world and how he kind of just disregards everything outside of that, it led me to believe that maybe his version of events or his understanding of his and his wife's relationship and dynamic might not actually be what he thinks that it is. A specific quote in the third chapter that kind of solidified this for me was when he says, "Besides, I didn't need anyone else when I had Abby." He has invested so much importance into his relationship with his wife that it felt almost very codependent. And I mean that in the actual like psychological technical term, not just throwing it around. I'm talking about it felt like his ability to function heavily depended on his wife. He discusses that when she went missing, she was the one that was in charge of the finances. She was the one that handled all of that. So when he finally went to go check their bank account, he had seen that there were several large withdrawals that were made prior to her disappearance. Like the way that it was being set up, this very much sounded like a person in a domestic violence situation leaving that situation, getting prepared. And that kind of was cemented when we get to her chapter, because like I said, up until this point, 30% of the book, we've only gotten one chapter from her perspective. And in that chapter, she explains how they met on a plane and how right off the jump, at first, she found him to be incredibly annoying and incredibly irritating and didn't want anything to do with him because they met on a plane and he thought that she was in his seat, but she wasn't. And then he told her that he was an author and immediately she was interested in him. Now, this could also be setting her up to be not necessarily an unreliable narrator, but seeing the switch up that she made immediately after he announced that he was an author, it felt almost like her personal experience in life and her romanticization, is that a word? Romanticization? Her romanticizing the idea of authors because she explains that she was taken in by her aunt when she was a child because her mother just couldn't handle it anymore, couldn't deal with her anymore, which begs the question of like, what kind of child was she? Why did her mother feel that way? But she discusses how her aunt was someone in the publishing sphere. And so she often had a lot of authors come over for dinner parties and things of the like. And so ever since Abby was a child, she was very emotionally interested and invested in authors and in that lifestyle and in the stories that they could tell. And so to see her character in that one singular chapter go from being almost disgusted with Grady to instantly being interested and almost like head over heels simply at the mere mention of him being an author also lends itself to this idea that maybe she isn't exactly the most reliable person. So you're not really sure like whose perspective we're supposed to be trusting or if we should trust either of them, because Grady seems to think that they had a very playful and loving relationship, whereas she feels like she was just a trophy wife in a sense. In his phone, in his contact, her contact is literally the wife. And in his chapter, he thinks it's a funny joke that they had between themselves, but then we switched to her chapter and she was like, I was nothing more than just the wife. And so again, who are we supposed to trust? Whose opinion are we supposed to value, I guess you could say? Now, there's something else that was pretty interesting that occurred, which is that Grady keeps seeing things and hearing things that, as far as we as the audience know, are not real. So this island that he goes to, it has no internet. All of the landlines are down. And he's getting a couple of different mixed stories about why the landlines don't work. There's a shopkeeper who had told him that the landlines were down because there was a boat that messed up the lines underneath the ocean. Like I guess it like ran into them or something like that, and that they just haven't been able to be repaired yet. And then the other story that he heard from the sheriff, Sandy, is that it was struck by lightning. I can't remember exactly. Basically, he's learning a lot of conflicting information about why there are no landlines. And so he, for all intents and purposes, is stranded on this island. He has been told that there are return ferries to go back to the mainland, but that they're very sporadic and that it's heavily dependent upon the weather, which is always fluctuating. And so we do, as the audience, get this very eerie sense of like something doesn't feel right about this island. Sandy mentions pretty early on, as soon as they get off the ferry, because she's driving him up to the cabin, that people see ghosts all of the time. There's a redwood forest on this island that seems to hold a lot of importance and a lot of significance to the locals for some reason. We don't quite know why yet. It's framed as like environmental preservation, but there's something sketchy about that. I'm still unsure what it's supposed to represent or what it is supposed to, like, why it is so important. But the other interesting thing is that this cabin that Grady is staying at, it belonged to a very famous writer that was another client of his agent, Kitty. And she has allowed him to go stay there for a couple of months so that he can write his next book, because ever since his wife's disappearance, he has been a wreck. Now, the first night that he's there, he has his dog Columbo, which I'm not sure I love that name, but whatever, that's besides the point. Columbo is like clawing and scratching and pawing at this carpet. And when Grady lifts up the carpet, he sees that one of the planks, one of the floorboards is loose. So he lifts it up and he finds a skeletal hand resting atop of a like velvet pillow or something like that. Obviously very weird. He also finds a manuscript from this really famous author that is basically completed. And he read it and he said it's one of the best things that he's ever read in his life. And so naturally, because he's had writer's block for the last year and he's going broke and he has no money, he decides to steal the manuscript. Now, I'm not gonna lie, I might have done the same thing. It was giving Yellowface vibes for sure. If you haven't read Yellowface by R.F. Kuang, that is pretty much the entire plot of that novel. So this particular plot line in Beautiful Ugly was very reminiscent to me of that. Another testament to Grady being almost like not necessarily an unreliable narrator in the specific context, but for us to understand that maybe his perception of things is not exactly what he thinks it is. We as the reader are not quite sure yet whether he is actually imagining things or whether these things are occurring on Amberley Island and that everybody is kind of trying to gaslight him and make him think that it's not real. One of the examples is that there is a phone booth on the island. And because he doesn't have this is when he's learning that the landlines don't work. He goes to make a call to his agent and it turns out that the phone line is dead. But in this phone booth is the Amberley Library. And so it's like a makeshift library. So while he's in this phone booth for the first time, he realizes that it doesn't work. He then goes to the store to get a few things, some groceries and the like. And when he comes back out of the store, the phone starts to ring. And of course, he had just tried to use it a few minutes earlier, so he's confused. He's thinking that maybe he's hallucinating this, but he decides to go and pick up the phone anyway. And Abby is on the other line. And it sounds like there's the ocean behind her, that there's, all this noise and everything. And she's like, why aren't you looking for me? Why can't you find me? She sounds panicked. And Grady's very confused by this. He's not sure if this is actually happening. As the reader, we're not sure if this is actually happening, because then the shopkeeper comes out, sees him, he's playing with the phone. And she's like, I already told you this phone doesn't work. And he's like, yeah, I thought I heard it ringing. And she's looking at him like he's insane. So as the reader, we're not quite sure how to feel about it. The other thing that we learn is when Grady goes over to Midge's house for dinner, it's him, Sandy, and Midge. And Midge is telling him about how about a year ago, around the time of his wife's disappearance, there was a woman who showed up during the tourist season. and she came to the island, but she never left. Nobody ever saw her boarding the ferry back to the mainland. And she just disappears. And then a few days later, there was a decomposed body of a man that showed up on the shore missing a hand. So, of course, we're supposed to assume that the skeletal hand that was under the floorboard of the cabin belonged to the body that washed up on shore. Not sure quite how this all fits in because at this point, the only thing that's really occurring in this book is that questions are being presented to the reader, things are showing up, and we're not quite sure how they all fit in yet. So I don't know what the body washing up on shore has anything to do. We're also led to assume that the woman who showed up for the day and didn't get on the return ferry was his wife because it did happen around the time of her disappearance. She was also the goddaughter of Kitty, his agent, so she might have known about the cabin as well. The other thing that I thought was interesting is that when he showed up to the cabin, theoretically, Sandy had told him nobody has been here for years since the author passed away, so it's going to be dusty, but I'm sure you can clean it up. I'm sure it'll be fine. And when he comes in, the cabin is spotless. There's the scent of coffee. There are fresh flowers. And so Grady's understanding is that Kitty, his agent, had sent someone prior to his arrival to clean up and get the cabin ready for him. But as the reader, I don't think that's what happened. I think that maybe they were in an abusive relationship, that his wife literally ran away, plotted out this whole disappearance, and that she just went to the cabin and that she's just been living there the whole time. And then with his appearance at the cabin, she is hiding out somewhere. Who's to say? That's my thought process. That's what I'm thinking is happening. Now, so far, because when you're reading a thriller, or at least when I'm reading a thriller, I am trying to figure out clues. I'm trying to figure out what clues are important, what things I should be paying attention to, what's going on. And so when Sandy is driving Grady up to the cabin, she says she's explaining the history of Amberley, the island, and how it was named after this Scottish woman who was from the island and had traveled the entire world only to come back to Amberley and realize that this was home. This was the place that she felt more comfortable, and that it was ironic because it was basically kind of like a cautionary tale about this idea of you don't know what you have until it's gone. And the way that she is talking about it and phrasing it is almost like she knows why Grady is there on the island. And it's kind of supposed to, I think, represent Grady's character and how when he was with his wife, from his wife's perspective, it was not that great of a marriage and that she was lying to him and that he was taking her for granted. But from his perspective, she was the only person that he could ever imagine being with and that she was his person. And so it begs the question of like, did he actually feel this way while they were together? Or is it just because she went missing and he literally cannot get his mind on anything else? The thought of her going missing and where she is and if she's all right, it literally consumes his every waking moment. There's also something that I thought was interesting, which is that he mentions that one of the very few things that they used to argue about was his alcohol problem. And his wife despised it, but from his perspective, it was never an actual issue. It was just his drug of choice, and everybody has their escape mechanisms and all this stuff. And so I thought it was particularly interesting, and it lended itself to this idea of him being an unreliable narrator, where he even acknowledges that this was a point of contention between him and his wife, and yet he's downplaying it, he's minimizing it, he's refusing to acknowledge that maybe this was a bigger issue in their dynamic than he thought that it was. So again, I'm just not sure what to think, because Abby in her chapter, she admits, because she's going to therapy for the first time, and she admits to the therapist that she has been lying to him about everything. That's how she puts it. When the therapist asks, she's like, oh, well, what are you lying about? Abby says, everything. And so we know her to be a liar based on her own admission. But at the same time, it begs the question of, well, why was she lying? What kind of person really was she? And I do wish, it doesn't need to be 50-50. And again, I'm only 30% of the way through the book, so this is subject to change. But up until this point, I wish that we had gotten a bit more of a back and forth. If we're going to do a dual POV, I kind of want more of Abby's point of view. I wish that we had been laying the foundation and the framework for her character from her perspective a little bit more than what we're getting so far. Something else that I'm not sure how to, well, actually, I do know how I feel about it. I'm not a fan, is that Alice Feeney's writing, that it has that choppy element to it. But what's more than that is I feel like we're missing a lot of details in a way that would help immerse the reader more than what we're getting with just a few small changes and a few tweaks. So for instance, there is a chapter titled Passive Aggressive, and Grady is kind of inspecting the cabin and he's looking around. And because this cabin used to belong to a very famous author, the author has a pretty extensive library. And so Grady is checking out the books, and the quote is, I check out the wall of books next. It's like a library of the best novels ever written. They're all here, and I select a classic I think I might like to reread. And my note is, why not actually specify some of the books that are on the wall, or at least specify the specific classic that Grady picked up to reread? I feel like this would have been a really great opportunity to actually add a little bit of personality to Grady, express a little bit more to the reader what kind of person he is based off of what book he chose to pick off of the wall of apparently all of the classics, right? And I thought that was a pretty weak point, and that happens a little bit throughout the book as well, where there are just things that are occurring that I wish we had gone a bit more detail to, like I said, just immerse us a little bit more in the mind of this character, or at least understand his personality a bit more. I'm interested to see where this goes and how this all comes together, what the body has to do with anything, why there's a missing hand, why his wife disappeared, if she was taken, if she planned this all out and actually left him, all this stuff. I'm excited to see where this goes. So I will come back around the 60-ish% mark and I will let you know. Okay, I am checking in at 67% of the way through Beautiful Ugly by Alice Feeney. And I don't know what I was expecting from the writing in this book, but it definitely wasn't where we have ended up. So the last time I checked in with you guys, Grady had just had dinner over at Midge's house with Sandy, and they had told him about the body that had washed up on shore about a year before and the woman that appeared. And so Grady ends up telling Sandy that he actually had found what he assumed was the hand that belonged to the corpse underneath the floorboards in the cabin. So of course, she's very eager to check that out. So they go back to the cabin and whoop, lo and behold, it's not there. The hand is missing. Even the pillow that it was resting upon is missing. And Grady is confused. He's obviously not understanding how that happened. He's wondering if he made it all up, but he knows that he didn't. And since that point, there's like a lot happening, and yet nothing has actually happened. Let me explain this. So within the book, 6 weeks approximately have passed since his dinner over at Midge's. And he has spent the majority of that time up at the cabin just writing. He rarely goes down to the village to get supplies, but outside of that, he's basically just drinking and writing and drinking and writing. He's not getting a lot of sleep. And that is something that keeps coming up in the book. He's so tired. He's so tired. He's so tired. It's literally like every other thought that he has. He has mentioned that he struggles with insomnia and that he had a doctor, after, going to different doctors, one of them eventually prescribed him sleeping pills, but they don't really help. And we're led to believe that these auditory and visual hallucinations that he's having have something to do with the fact that he just cannot sleep. And so it's lending itself to us as the reader not being sure what is going on. But something that I'm really disliking about Alice Feeney's writing or about the book, I don't know, again, it could just be this book, but she is laying out so many different threads that you're not really sure which one to tug on. And that for me is a problem when it comes to thrillers, because it feels like a cheap magic trick where you're not really performing a trick that is crafty and elegant and like well thought out. It's just you throwing a bunch of shit at the wall and seeing what's going to stick. So as the reader, instead of us trying to figure out this mystery with, wondering which clues are actually important and which things are not, and, what's typical of a thriller, what's happening is that there's mystery after mystery after mystery after mystery. And we're just not sure which thread we're supposed to be following and how it's all going to come together at the end. Now, listen, if at the end of this book, everything that gets answered, all of the 1.5 million questions that have been presented to us get answered in a very satisfactory way, then I will eat my fucking words and I will apologize. But the way that it's looking right now, it feels almost as though we're just not sure as the audience what questions we're supposed to be asking. And that to me is a problem in the thriller genre. Let me just rattle off some questions that have been presented. So after Grady gets back to the cabin that night that he's coming back,
you crazy little mister.
There is an envelope that had been slipped under his door, and it ends up being a news article that was written several years prior by his wife, Abby, because she was an investigative journalist. And we're not sure how this all ties in, because we're led to believe that the article was written, it was about a woman that had been in prison for 30 years for murdering her daughter's rapist. And so led to believe that it's Cora, the shopkeeper on the island of Amberley. But when Grady goes to kind of like ask about it, he's not very graceful about it, and he doesn't get an actual answer. So we don't know if it is actually her, but we're led to believe. So now we have all these news articles are being dropped off at his door. Sometimes whoever's leaving them is literally breaking into his cabin and leaving them on his desk. So it's not even just slipping them under the door anymore. It's someone who has access to his cabin. So there's that part of the mystery. And then we get to this idea of every single time he's trying to ask about leaving the island, everybody's blowing him off. Everybody's neglecting to answer his question. And it seems, for all intents and purposes, like he is trapped on this island. And he just now at the 67% mark is he realizing that, hey, that's kind of a problem. Like, why do these people want to keep me here so badly? Why am I not free to leave whenever I wish? This is strange, right? You would think that he would have that realization earlier on, but no, he's a fucking idiot. So anyway, so that's strange, right? Then we learn that there's this weird trust, this like council of all of these members, these locals that have joined it to protect the island from outsiders. Also very strange. We're not sure how that has anything to do with anything. There's also ghosts of children, because apparently 30 years prior, there was a substitute teacher that was supposed to be watching the kids, and he was an outsider from the mainland, but he was at the pub drinking all day. And so he ended up just leaving them to their own devices, and they went into a cave and they all drowned at high tide. So that's when the council was created by Sandy, because her daughter was one of the kids that passed away. And so you're like, okay, so now there's ghost children. There's this mysterious mist that keeps popping up. We're led to like believe that maybe it's not a hallucination because Grady sees it, but Sandy also sees it. So we're thinking that it's real. But so there's this mystical element. And then as soon as he finishes speaking to Sandy in the cave, because on the anniversary, she had gone to the cave to like drink herself into a fucking stupor. So after he goes to talk to her, because the manuscript that he stole from Charles, she had actually been she had been the only person to have read it. And he learned this from the pub owner. She told him that Sandy always was very good friends with Charles before he passed away, and that she was always the first to read his stuff. So he gets really paranoid that the manuscript that he just stole and literally just sent off back to the mainland via post earlier that afternoon, that she might have read it and is going to know that he stole it. So he is frantic, goes to find her. She's hiding out in a cave. She's drunk as hell. She tells him the story about how all these kids died and how there's literally no other children on the island, and there's, they burned down the school and all this other stuff. Something else, another thread that it has not been addressed in the book yet, but this is something that I have noted. Aside from Grady, there is not a single other man on this island. There are 25 local residents, and we have met like 8 of them so far. They have all been women. Not a single other man is on this island, which is very strange, very peculiar. I'm not sure why that is. But again, this is another thread that we're following. So we have the mist and the ghost children. We have the articles that Abby had written that are popping up under his door. We have the fact that he's not allowed to leave this island, and that there's this weird trust council that is like hyper protective of the island itself, and they don't trust outsiders. There was a weird banging noise while he was over at Midge's house for dinner earlier in the book, and they were framing it like it was their mom, but he goes to the cemetery at some point and there's a woman that just magically appears that is supposedly Midge's and Sandy's mom, but then she like disappears almost like a ghost. So we're not sure what that's all about. It seems like Midge is holding somebody captive in her attic or her upstairs room. At least that's what we think is going on, right? So there's just super strange shit. So after he finishes speaking to Sandy in the cave, he gets back in the Range Rover that used to belong to Charles. That was a whole other thing. And he finds a letter that had been given to him with like when he went to Cora's shop. And it was a letter from Kitty saying that she had actually hired a private investigator after Abby disappeared, but she didn't want to say anything because there were no news. But now she had the private investigator look into Amberley Island, and she says, the people that are there aren't who they seem. So now we have this cryptic ass letter from Kitty, which is like, what the fuck? And then to make matters worse, as he's driving away from the beach, from the cave, he hits a woman that is riding a bicycle because he can't see because of the mist, and because on the radio there's like the sound of children crying or whatever. So he goes to turn it off, ends up hitting this lady on the bike, gets out of the car, goes to check on her. The mist magically dissipates like immediately, and whoop, who is it? It's Abby. Oh, wow, it's Abby. But here's the kicker. She doesn't know who the fuck he is. And she has brown eyes, not blue eyes, like he remembered. And throughout this whole internal monologue of him fucking realizing that this is his wife, except she has brown eyes and not blue eyes, he's like, I'm so tired. I'm so tired. I'm so exhausted. I'm so exhausted. Could it be the insomnia? Am I hallucinating? No, this seems real. I'm pretty sure this is real. And we're like, is it? So she asks him, because her bicycle is now destroyed, she asks him to give her a ride to her job, which, it's this pottery shop that is called Beautiful Ugly, which is what he titled his manuscript based off of, he was looking at a map of Amberley and he's like, oh, this seems like it fits with the book. I'm going to call my book Beautiful Ugly, which is such a stupid name, both for a book and for a pottery shop. Like, I don't get it, man. I really don't understand. That's fine. That's besides the point. The fact is that we are following, it feels like I'm playing a game of Clue, and I'm like, is it Colonel Mustard in the library? Wait, hold on, time out. Look at this weird stampede of elephants and giraffes running through the living room. What the hell is this? How am I supposed to fucking focus on solving this mystery when there's like way more weird pressing shit that's going on? So I'm just not understanding the direction that this book is going, because we have the ghost children, we got the cryptic letters, we got the missing hand and the corpse that showed up on the beach, and the fact that there's this weird cult-like council on the island and they're not letting Grady leave, and they seem to hold a lot of importance on him writing this book. Like they want him to stay there so that he can write his book, which is super weird. Like we don't know why yet. Anyway, all I'm trying to get at is if it amounts to something, if this all gets wrapped up and all of the questions that I have become answered, I will be happy. I will be a happy camper. Otherwise, I feel like I'm about to be really, really disappointed in the ending of this book. And there is nothing that pisses me off more than reading a thriller with a dog shit ending. And that's kind of how I feel about how this is all going to go. The ending of this book was Dookie sucked straight out the hole. It was awful. This has to be one of the worst thrillers I think I've ever read in my life. I am not even going to bother getting into everything that led up to the twist, reveal, everything like that. I'm just going to get straight into it. Just a quick rundown, right? So after Grady drops who he thinks is Abby off at the ceramics studio, she invites him in for a glass of water because he's looking rather peaked. And he goes in, comes away with a walkie-talkie somehow, a list of everybody's name who is on the trust, and a brochure of her business that has a picture of this woman on it that he thinks is Abby. Then they find out that Sandy is missing and that she hasn't been seen since she went to the cave. So they ask him about it. And he's like, no, I didn't see her. I don't know what that's about. It ended up being a setup. Everybody knew exactly who he was before he even came to the island. So this whole time, one of the big reveals and the reason why they didn't want him to leave the island is because they knew that he was married to Abby. The woman who he ran over on that was riding her bicycle was actually Abby, wearing brown contacts for some fucking reason. The notes, all the letters that were popping up underneath his door, it was actually Midge and Sandy's mom. She was a real person and she was living upstairs in Midge's house. So she was like sneaking out and leaving these newspaper clippings trying to warn him because she was one of the only people that felt bad for him and wanted him to leave the island. We also learned that the whole reason that this all happened because Kitty was in cahoots with Abby and Sandy and everybody else on the island who were all women because apparently all of the evils of the world are because of men. And so therefore they wanted like a sanctuary and they wanted Amberley Island to be like a sanctuary for women. And so no men were allowed except of course for their resident authors because Charles Whitaker, oh my God, dude, there were so many reveals that it was like, it started like, I stopped even paying attention after a certain point because I was like, oh yeah, naturally it's the most ridiculous fucking thing ever. So all of the chapters that we were getting from Abby's perspective weren't from Abby, Grady's wife. They were from Abby, aka Kitty, from like 30 years prior because she was married to Charles Whitaker. And Abby, Grady's wife, is her goddaughter, but she ended up adopting her because Abby's mom committed suicide. So that was like a huge reveal. So all the chapters that we were getting from Abby's POV, they were actually Kitty's POV from like 30 years prior. So Charles was the resident author and all of the money that he was making from his books were going into the Amberley Trust. And when he died, they needed another author to come in and be their resident author. Why they didn't just have someone like Abby, who was an investigative journalist and knew how to write stuff, do exactly what Grady ended up doing, which was taking all of the ideas that Charles had left, his unfinished manuscripts or whatever it is, and just edit them herself and generate income from that. Why they had to like trap this man, beyond me, man. I don't understand that at all. I'm very confused as to the logic and the thought process of why they needed a resident author, but whatever. Okay, we're just gonna move past it because that's not even the most fucking ridiculous thing. Oh my, it wasn't Abby being AKA Kitty, it was not the most ridiculous thing. Them needing him to stay on the island so that they could generate income because they don't want to have any visitors ever at all. Not even the most ridiculous thing. The fact that Grady didn't even realize that all of the residents on the island were all women until he walked in at the church and saw that all of them were women is not even the most ridiculous thing because, like, let's be honest, most of us as readers clocked that way earlier on because it's like, yeah, dude, when was the last time you ever went 2 seconds without having a fucking man in your face? Anyway, the most ridiculous shit, the big twist, the big reveal as to what happened the night that Abby went missing was that it was Grady who tried to murder her. Are you ready for this? Holy fucking shit.
Be nice. I'm finding it.
Oh my God, I don't even know how to explain this. Okay, so when we open up in the first chapter, he is on the phone. He calls his wife. He's like, hey, where are you? We're supposed to be getting the news together. And she's like, I'm on my way. I'm almost home. She said, have you heard any news? He's like, no, not yet. She's like, okay, well then let's hang up so that the line can be open if you get a call from your publisher, right? So they hang up. He ends up a few minutes later getting a call from his publicist, his agent, everybody, and they're like, congratulations, you made it on the New York Times bestseller list. So then he calls his wife back to tell her the good news, and while they're on the phone, she comes across someone laying in the road wearing a red coat exactly like the one that she has. So she pulls over and she stops the car and she's on speakerphone with him and he's like, no, 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 don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. And she's like, you would want somebody to stop for me if it was me in the road. Like, I'm gonna just give me a second. So as she's getting out of the car, as far as we knew in the first chapter, she just disappeared. So Grady ran a mile because that's how far she was, all the way to her car to see that the car door was still left open, that he was still on the phone with her, the phone was on speakerphone, and she just disappeared. So what had actually happened was that the woman laying in the middle of the road was actually Grady wearing the red coat. So what they had explained it as is that he was on the phone with her, he hung up, got his call from his publicist, his agent, whatever, got the news, hung up, ran a whole mile and some change to where he knew his wife was going to be driving, laid down in the middle of the road, and then called her again. So while he's laying in the middle of the fucking road, he's supposedly on the phone with her. She drives up on him and sees that he's in the middle of the road, obviously doesn't know that it's him. So she gets out of the car. The whole time he's like, no, don't do it, don't do it. Because he had known, because she was an investigative journalist and she was being harassed and getting death threats and all this stuff, she had recently begun to record all of her phone calls and he knew that. So he needed an alibi, which is why he was on the phone. So listen to this, right? This is what happened. So as he's laying in the road on the phone with her after just huffing and puffing, running a fucking mile and whatever change to get to where she was going to be, she pulls over, gets out, goes to help whoever it is laying on the ground, and he attacks her with chloroform and then throws her off the cliff to make it seem like she had committed suicide just like her mom, right? As she is falling, she reaches out and grabs onto a tree branch or root or whatever that's growing out of the side of the cliff and then waits until he's gone and then pulls herself back up and climbs back up the cliff while it's raining, while the, windy and all this other crazy shit, right? After she's been chloroformed. I'm sorry. What? What? You're telling me that someone who just got chloroformed and thrown off a fucking cliff is able to do all of that? Whatever, okay? Just fucking ridiculous. So you're asking yourself, you're like, well, why would he do this? Why did he do this? It's because he thought she was having an affair because he had seen all of the withdrawals that were coming out of their account and he thought that she was getting ready to leave him, much like what I thought in the beginning of the book. And he thought that she had been having an affair and that she was literally getting ready to leave him. And it turns out that she was doing IVF behind his back and that she eventually got pregnant despite the fact that he had said 1.5 million fucking times that he does not want any kids. And she wanted to have a child before she was 40. So she just went ahead using both of their money to have a child behind his fucking back when he has explicitly stated that he does not want any children. So you're like, wow, that's super fucked up. But here's the thing. Earlier in the book, we learned that he was scared that his wife was going to force a pregnancy. So he went and got a vasectomy behind her back. Oh my God. Oh my God. You people should not be together. You should not be together. Okay. I understand that for a lot of couples, this can be a really difficult thing to reckon with, which is that you both love each other, you both care about each other, but one of you wants a kid and one of you does not. Here's the thing. There is no compromising when it comes to that. There is no compromising. One person is going to be very upset and one person is going to be the one who gets what they want. And there's going to be a lot of resentment that builds up. Now, I'm not even going to open that whole can of worms, okay? But I am just going to say it never works. It never works out. If one person wants a child and one person does not, I am sorry. You have to split up. You just have to split up, or one of you has to be able to concede that you're going to give the other person what they want. And what pissed me off, because Kitty is the one that is telling him all of this, of where all that money was going and that she wasn't actually having an affair, is that Kitty framed it as though Abby was doing Grady a favor. She's like, and she was going to give you a child and she was going to make you a father and give you the family that you never had because you had such a shitty childhood. And it's like, dude, that's so fucking evil and manipulative. Like that's fucking crazy. If somebody doesn't want a kid, it's okay to not want kids. And to make it seem like Abby was just doing him a favor is insanity. Okay. Is it more insane than having an entire island of all women because they hate men and they blame men for the evils of the world? I don't know. I don't know. But here's the thing. They gave him a choice and they were like, hey, here's your choice. We can either murder you or you can be our resident author and you need to write good books and make the bestseller list. And if you don't, then we're going to murder you. And he's like, I want to leave. And they're like, yeah, that's too fucking bad, buddy. Okay, so we fast forward. So those are all the twists, right? That was the big reveal, was that he had tried to murder Abby because he thought she was having an affair. And he was scared not only of Abby abandoning him, but of Kitty abandoning him as well and dropping him as a client. And that was the thing that upset him more than anything. So that's why he attempted to murder Abby instead of having like a conversation like a goddamn adult. But hey, neither of them was really excelling in that department. So, whatever. So after all of that, the redwoods never come up again. The redwood forest being so important ends up meaning nothing. That was so annoying to read. Like every single twist that was happening, I was just like, this makes no logistical sense. This is absolutely fucking absurd. This is such lazy, weird writing. There are so many plot holes, so many continuity errors. Like, this is just a bad fucking book. And that's pretty much where I've landed. This is a huge, colossal waste of time. And I cannot even understand. Like, I've never read anything else by this author. And after reading this book, I don't think I ever will. Like, there is nothing about this book that made me go, huh, what a crafty and well-written thriller. Oh my God. Like, no. And like, the other thing was the writing was just so repetitive. We wasted so much time listening to Grady go over the same thoughts over and over and over again, coming to the same conclusions over and over and over again. And just like, it just kept repeating. Even in Abby's chapters, aka Kitty's chapters, it was the same thing over and over again, the same arguments, the same feelings, the same. And it was just so repetitive that it was like, wow, we could have cut this book back by like a third. We could have edited like a third of this crap out because it's just the same sentiments with the same language being bashed over our head over and over again without adding any new context, without adding any new information or deepening the characters and making them feel more real. It just felt really annoying. Everything about this was so unenjoyable after a certain point, and the wrap up was crazy. They end up murdering him anyway, by the way, in case you were wondering, because a year after the whole big reveal, he ends up making the bestseller list with his book Beautiful Ugly. And the book is about an author who is trapped on an island and can't escape, and gives a code to his readers to try and save him. And Grady ends up putting a code in his book. And he's like, oh wow, I'm so lucky that Kitty didn't notice. Really? You think she didn't notice? You think she's stupid enough to read you writing about a book about an author trying to escape an island using a secret code, and that she's not going to be looking for a secret code? Like, come on, dude. Come on. So they end up burying him alive in the cemetery. And that's how the book ends. And yeah, I thought it was ridiculous. I thought it was crazy. I thought that a lot of these characters, had they just been fucking adults and had a real adult conversation with each other, could have avoided a lot of issues. A lot of issues. Like, I hated everybody. I didn't like a single one of these characters by the end of it. I was like, you guys all suck. You're all operating from a place of like weird trauma, like holding a man hostage and then murdering him. That doesn't really make you any better. Like, at least, like his motivations for trying to murder Abby. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and say I would ever attempt to murder someone, but if I thought that my wife was having an affair and that she was stealing thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars out of our joint bank account, and that she was going to leave me, and that I was going to lose literally every single thing that ever mattered to me, including my agent, who is literally like in charge of my career, that is one of the most important things to me, I would probably do some heinous shit. I mean, I'd want to talk about it like a real fucking human and adult, but this is a thriller book. And so his motivations are pretty on par for somebody like that who has abandonment issues and is at risk of losing literally every single important thing to him. I think he should have had a conversation with her about the vasectomy. I think he should have gotten that out of the way. I think she shouldn't have been taking money from their joint account to do IVF behind his back, which basically confirmed all of his fears that she was going to try to force a pregnancy. That's quite literally exactly what she did. I don't know. Like, hey, guess what? If somebody doesn't want a kid, don't make them have a kid. Like, I don't know how else to, I don't know who needs to hear that, but like, yeah, that's crazy. And then to frame it like you're doing them a favor, that's even crazier. Like, shut up. Oh my God. So in closing, my thoughts are, this book sucked. It was lazy. It was bad writing. It was repetitive. It was irritating. All the characters were unlikable. There were a lot of plot holes, a lot of logistical errors. It just didn't fucking make any sense. And I hated it. I hated it very much. But yeah, that's what I got for Beautiful Ugly by Alice Feeney. I will catch you guys in the next one. Bye.